to hear about data center infrastructure that maximizes business flexibility. And we're going to have the CTO of Data Center Solutions from Huawei Technologies to come up. I would like to ask Mr. Ron Raffensperger to join me on stage for the final presentation before lunch. Ron, please join me on stage.
Thanks very much. Okay, as pointed out, I am the thing standing between you and lunch, and I'm going to try to at least make it interesting for you and give you something to think about as you head off for lunch. As was mentioned, my name is Ron Raffensperger. I'm the CTO for Huawei. I'm actually based in Shenzhen, China, which is where our corporate headquarters are. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about some of the changes that you're facing in your business and how you can really focus at some of the choices you make around your infrastructure that will improve your flexibility going forward as you make new kinds of business models. I think everybody's familiar with the fact that the hosting and the ISP business is changing. You're having many new kinds of opportunities from your traditional kinds of services around maybe space rental, maybe being able to do managed hosting, into new kinds of solutions that could be horizontal ones. Maybe you focus around a particular industry, or maybe you focus around specialization where you're putting different kinds of solutions together. One of the things at Huawei, we have a complete suite that has unified communications, telepresence, those kinds of things. And we have solutions providers that are offering those as hosted services. Lots of new kinds of opportunities. At the same time, the choices around your technology are changing as well. And so the fact that you have gone from dedicated kinds of hardware to virtual machines, in the future, where are we going? Well, it's not entirely clear, but that's one of the things I want to talk about today because there are quite a lot of technology evolutions and innovations that are starting to happen that will change the way that you have the ability to operate the infrastructure for your business. One way to think about it is kind of the Moore's Law moving towards the ability to have the new kinds of solutions that are really taking advantage of new kinds of evolving technologies. So in our view, I think that the way to think about it is, as you're going to build these new solutions, think of it as layers, right? So you clearly you have your data center facility, you have the physical resources, servers, storage, networking, that kind of thing. On top of that, you have probably going to be building a cloud platform and then offering applications. If you think about putting that together in that way so that you have really a cloud-based data center, you have the flexibility to be able to offer new kinds of services. So you can offer anything from, traditional kinds of just selling space all the way up to offering things like virtual desktops or offering the unified communication or video conferencing as a service, security as a service. So if you've put in place this layered solution, you have a lot more flexibility about what you're going to do as you go forward. And the traditional kinds of infrastructure that you're used to really create problems for you. They create limitations. So if we look at servers, if you've been in the business of offering managed hosting, maybe you've just selected the solutions that were fitting that particular customer. And you end up with a data center that's full of a lot of incompatible equipment, gives you a real headache for being able to manage it, maintain it, upgrade it, that sort of thing. Or maybe your focus was around just, I'm going to do everything with one-use servers, right? Maybe it's a cheap way to go, gives you vendor independence because you can buy from a lot of different people, but it really doesn't give you the kind of flexibility, particularly when you want to change the amounts of storage or change the compute workloads, can cause some problems. On the storage side, a lot of people have been putting in dedicated storage for their particular customers. Again, you end up with a mix of vendors, a lot of management challenges around that. Or maybe that you've put in some pools, but they're dedicated by type, right? So here's my SAN, here's my NAS, I've just added object. But those don't intermix, and you can't get economies of scale out of that. Or maybe you've started to look at some of the new hyperconverged offerings, but maybe they don't meet all of your needs. And in networking, we have a similar situation where we've traditionally had hierarchical routing, which is fine, except that it really puts a lot of constraints around the new kinds of technologies. Maybe you want to use Trill, maybe you want to use CLOS, maybe you want to use a lot of VXLANs that cause problems when you're actually having to configure all of those top-of-rack, intermediate, and core switches. So there's a lot of challenges around that. And so the situation that most people are in is they had a really good idea, right? This is all clean. It's all going to look great. It's all going to be pristine. The wiring's going to look great. Unfortunately, what it ends up in practice is kind of a mess, right? And so what I'd like to talk today about is how can you kind of look at that in a slightly different way? So the thing that is really changing is in the area of moving from dedicated kinds of hardware to more software control and merging of functions. So I think you're seeing a lot more people that are offering storage that can be SAN, it can be NAS, it can be block, it can be object storage, and it is looking at just a generalized set of storage using common pools of resources. And on the hardware, clearly we're moving to software-defined kind of everything. And even in the area of converged systems, which are relatively new, we're starting to see some talk about composable systems or ways of segmenting the functionality in new kinds of ways. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of work around changing from, I've got these dedicated GPUs that can do certain functions very quickly, but they're limited in functionality, and moving more towards more flexible hardware, FPGAs, the field programmable, where they can take on new functions as you need in the future. So that from a hardware standpoint then, this just kind of illustrates where you're headed is being able to go from the traditional kinds of dedicated into the future where things will be much more dynamic from the ability to flexibly manage what you want. So an example is around the memories. So memories are starting to change. I think everybody is starting to hear about things like 3D cross-point kinds of architectures that take some of the best of solid-state disks and merge it with more traditional kinds of RAM architectures. So you get very fast, you get very flexible. At Huawei, we've been working on this for a while. In different kinds of areas around traditional kinds of SSD, but also then as assists for being able to speed up normal kinds of hard disk accesses. So huge amounts of capacity increases. At the Huawei booth, you'll see we have an NVMe SSD that is a 2.5-inch, and it's a 3.2 terabyte. We've actually used that same form factor with a 3D crosspoint, and we can get 32 terabytes. So not deliverable today, but it gives you a flavor of what's coming in the future. So a lot more speed, a lot more capacity in a smaller area. In the area of the changing from dedicated hardware, we're seeing lots of advances. If you look at what Google is doing, what Microsoft is doing in Azure. In China, we have Baidu doing some specific work around search algorithm optimization, which actually, Huawei got into the software-defined storage business originally because of Baidu. They needed a way to speed up their search algorithms, and so we built our first SSD. That's quite a number of years ago now, but it's an example of how you can start to change the technologies using FPGAs instead of dedicated functions, either custom chips or even the general purpose GPUs. In the same way, storage is evolving to become software-defined. And then the next step is going to be around having the functions become virtualized, so that rather than thinking about the use of storage as being SAN or NAS, and then you have software-defined that gives you access to a pool of storage, you actually start thinking about the services, so that you can separate the concepts of the actual usage of the storage devices into what physically or what logically you want to use them for. And of course, we're already seeing a lot of software-defined storage. In fact, I think almost all cloud providers are moving very fast away from dedicated kinds of storage devices, SAN and NAS, and with dedicated controllers, and are moving into the world of software-defined. And you can scale it out simply by adding more servers with more disks associated with them. There are a number of offerings in the market right now. They give you much higher speeds and very high reliability. And on the physical side of storage, the march towards the future of SSD, or a solid-state storage, is going very quickly. Huawei, more than a year ago, stopped selling 15,000 RPM disks because SSD is faster, same size, same price. In the future, probably 10,000 RPM disks are going to go away. You're just going to have a lot of very high capacity 3.5-inch SATA or nearline SAS kinds of systems. The rest of it is all going to turn into solid state. So I think this is a trend that's happening very quickly. At the same time, the networking side has to change. So if you think about networking today with your hierarchical view of how things are put together, you see that the control and the actual transport are intermingled. They're very closely coupled with each other. But what we need to do is we need to be able to separate those so that you can start having hardware that worries about moving packets that is separated but controlled by higher level hardware that can worry about protocols, that can worry about functionalities, and can be managed through other software, through program interfaces, through APIs. So I think that the one of the concepts here is that in many of these areas, you're going to see the separation of what was traditionally done in hardware into software that could be quite physically distant from the actual hardware that's doing work. And at the same time, then, storage just becomes another service. So that you have the ability to just think about the storage as a pool, and how you use it becomes what's important, right? So that your applications, whether they're traditional or next generation kinds of things, which is things like Docker containers, those sorts of things, can just access the services they want without worrying about what's underlying it from either a storage technologies or even the protocols that are used. And finally, in the area of software, we're seeing the migration to standards. So I think one of the things you've seen here at the show is a lot of the discussion around the cloud is around OpenStack, a very open source framework for providing the interconnectivity, so that as a service provider, you have flexibility around your vendors, flexibility around how you run your system, and the key is around the APIs, right? So that I don't really care about what's underneath, I just want to access it through standardized interfaces. So at Huawei, we have this concept we call a software-defined, service-driven distributed cloud data center, or SDDC squared. And the concept is, I want to be able to take multiple physical data centers and put them all together as one logical data center, and then I want to be able to take that logical data center and separate it into virtual data centers that to the user or to the customer look like physical data centers. They have a certain amount of compute certain amount of storage, certain amount of networking capability, certain kinds of services, but in fact they're part of a larger whole, which then gives you the ability to have the efficiencies of a very large cloud, but give your customers the ability to run their own virtual data center. That customer could be an organization, and that organization could then subdivide those virtual data centers into smaller ones that are totally under their control. So a lot of flexibility. So this is our vision of where we're trying to go. And by the way, those data centers could be public as well. So this covers the concept of hybrid cloud, so that you have the ability to have a customer that has dedicated resources within your data center, but also has the ability to manage resources that are out in a public cloud, whether it be something like an Amazon or a Google or others, maybe even a public cloud offering that you have that is separate from your private cloud. You need this kind of flexibility. So in order to do that, at Huawei, we've been focused around a number of standard building blocks. So at the bottom part of this picture, you see that we have two kinds of offerings for service providers. One is to be able to build up systems in a scale-out fashion. The other is hyper-converged kinds of offerings as well. So just to briefly cover some of those, and if you want more information, you can see these in our booth here. We actually brought these two pieces of equipment. One is a 4U system that you can build out. The other one is a 2U. And just to cover briefly, the 4U one can be used for high-performance computing. It can be used for hyper-converged storage, integrated storage systems. It can be used for HPC with GPUs. So very flexible kind of a system. And you don't have to make the choices when you buy it, because it's just one standard set of chassis. And then you can change the functionality. It supports everything up through InfiniBand from a networking standpoint. So you just plug in what it is you want. The 2U system has up to 4 compute modules that plug into it. The computes can be either 1 or 2 socket. So you, again, can build up very large scale. And in the front of it, we have 24 2.5-inch disks. These support NVMe as well as standard kinds of SAS. So a lot of flexibility there. In the converged side, we don't have this hardware in the booth, but we do have information about it. It's a 12U system that has blades that you can plug into it that can be used for SAP HANA, can be used for large-scale compute, can be software-defined storage. So lots of different functionalities. And again, it's a standard building block that you can then decide later how you want to populate it. Has integrated switching that includes fiber channel, FCOE, InfiniBand, 100 gig Ethernet, etc. In fact, our standard optical card can be field programmable to become FCOE, or could become fiber channel, or can become 100 gig Ethernet. So very great amount of flexibility that you can have in this kind of a system. And finally, Huawei has been one of the leaders in software-defined networking because of our background in the telecom side of the world. And we have a converged SDN platform that essentially allows you to create a fabric within your data center. It can also be connected to your data center interconnect for between data centers as well. So you have one software-defined networking platform that ties everything together. It's all open, public APIs. You're not locked into to any particular vendor solution on this, and it can support all of the different kinds of protocols. So again, separate the transport part from the logic of how the things are going to be routed. And finally, our what we call our Ocean Store DJ is a software offering that allows you either in a cloud virtualized environment or non-virtualized, traditional kind of environment to start to offer data as a service. So you can offer backup as a service, you can offer disaster recovery as a service, database as a service, and then you can have all of your existing hardware underneath it. So the beauty is that you don't have to rip out all of this investment you made in SAN and NAS and other kinds of systems. You can have this orchestration, again, separating the control plane from the data layer to be able to provide the services that people are looking for. So the last slide really is about what kind of things are coming in the future. So we've every year Huawei has an event in Shanghai in China that we call Huawei Connect, and we show some of our advanced technologies. So in September of last year, we showed the ability to be able to decompose systems, have the compute, the memory, the storage all separated. Key concept is around doing RDMA over a converged Ethernet fabric. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this area, and it really plays into being able to have everything be on flash, everything be over Ethernet, and just scale it at will. And you can scale the pieces separately. So I think that this is another area to kind of, as you're looking at how you're going to build your infrastructure, keep in mind that this is the kind of things that will be coming in the future. So with that, I'll just summarize that I think that, one of the challenges that you have is around efficiency in your data center. And one of the challenges you have from a business standpoint is that you need the flexibility to be able to go in whatever direction the market pushes you in the future and be able to react that quickly. And so as you focus on doing this, think about making sure as you choose your different infrastructure around compute, storage, networking, cloud computing, that you have the ability to react to all of those. And with that, I'll let you get more or less on time towards your lunch. Thank you very much.